Hi everyone, I'm Matt from Look Into Bitcoin, and today we're going to be looking at Bitcoin and the halving event. To do this, we'll be using a number of resources that are all freely available on lookintobitcoin.com, your number one source for Bitcoin information. If you haven't already, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. So right now we're just on the Bitcoin live price chart here on lookintobitcoin.com. And if you weren't already aware, we've had a fairly nice few weeks, couple months really, of price action that has seen Bitcoin move up almost 50% from the lows it made late last year. So obviously this is getting a lot of people fairly bullish, fairly optimistic that maybe we've started the new bull cycle, and especially when we consider one of Bitcoin's largest fundamental events, which is the halving or halvening, whichever you'd like to say. So the Bitcoin halving event comes into effect about every 4 years for Bitcoin and actually reduces the inflationary rate of Bitcoin by about 50%. So obviously this is a huge fundamental factor and event in Bitcoin as it radically reduces the supply of new Bitcoin entering the market. So just for comparison, right now, about every 10 minutes or so, miners are mining blocks on the Bitcoin network. And as a reward for doing so, they'll earn a block reward, which currently sits at 6.25 Bitcoin. So if you look at that in USD dollar terms, that's about $150,000 for a block reward. So obviously a very substantial amount of money. However, in about 400 days from now, just over a year's time, that block reward is going to be cut in half. Miners will be receiving a block reward of only 3.125 Bitcoin per new block mined. And we can actually map this out, see how these events have impacted Bitcoin's price historically, and what we can potentially expect going forward leading up to the halving event and following the event itself. So I think first of all, if we just look at the miner revenue chart we have here on lookintobitcoin.com, this can maybe help visualize what we were discussing before a little easier. So we can see here, this is Bitcoin denominated miner rewards per day for miners securing the Bitcoin network. And as we can see, these vertical lines here indicate the halving event that Bitcoin's currently already experienced. And we can see that block rewards between 2016 up until 2020, as they occur about every 4 years, stayed at around an average of 1,800 Bitcoin per day. Obviously, there's fluctuations as the hash rate increases, decreases, and the Bitcoin mining difficulties adjusted. If these terms seem a little bit complex to you, I can definitely advise checking out those charts we have on lookintobitcoin.com and the YouTube videos we've got, which go a little bit more in depth into what those actually mean and how they're adjusted. But we can see in 2020, the most recent halving event, the block reward cut these daily Bitcoin miner rewards in half, so we were then only receiving about 800 to 900 Bitcoin per day on average. So a fairly substantial reduction in miner earnings, although this is only when we consider the BTC denominations. Once we actually factor in that the USD value of Bitcoin increased fairly substantially over that 4-year period, the USD earnings of miners actually increased fairly substantially. I think another great chart we can look at to try and really anticipate the impact that this halving has on the USD value of Bitcoin, we can look at the stock to flow model. Now, this is comparing the current circulating supply of Bitcoin on the network, which is the stock, and the incoming new supply or the flow of Bitcoin entering the network. And once we actually compare these stock to flow ratios, the amount of inflationary rate compared to the existing supply, we can actually map that out and really get an accurate valuation of how Bitcoin should be fairly valued according to the stock to flow metric. So if we just scroll down a little bit, we can see the halving events again, these vertical lines, but we can see the Bitcoin price itself is following this stock to flow predicted fair value valuation fairly decently, apart from up until recently where we've had a fairly extended bear market, which we can see here. This oscillator tells us the current deviation or variance away from this fair value line. So we can see right now we're, according to this, very much undervalued in terms of Bitcoin's fundamentals to price. But we can see historically Bitcoin has followed this stock to flow model valuation fairly accurately, and especially after we have these halving events and we give ourselves about a year to adjust to the new inflationary rate of Bitcoin, we can see that Bitcoin tends to have a fairly exponential rise following these halving events. And due to this, a lot of people trade and invest on Bitcoin based on a standard 4-year investment cycle, which does make a lot of sense given the fact that every 4 years we'll have a boom and a bust period of Bitcoin just in terms of the inflationary rate and the changes in price due to that. And obviously, in hindsight, it's very easy to say that these 4-year cycles are easy to play, especially when taking into consideration the time distance we have to the halving events, which is what these gradient colors are actually indicating, the amount of time we have till the next halving. Obviously, in hindsight, it seems very easy. So potentially after this next halving, we'll all say the same thing, that in hindsight, where we are right now was a very obvious buy signal, but we'll have to wait and see how price is actually impacted following the next halving event, which is currently due to occur at around March 2024. Although we do have to consider that this date is constantly changing. It's not a fixed 4-year period. It's taking into account 210,000 mined blocks. And when we average out, the average block takes around 10 minutes or so, then that averages to around 4 years. But as the hash rate is constantly changing and the difficulty is constantly increasing and decreasing, this tends to fluctuate a little bit as to when the actual halving event will definitely occur. But just for fun, just for some speculation, if we look at the current stock to flow predicted model of the fair value of Bitcoin, it's indicating a fair value of around $60,000, which is not too far from where we topped out at around $68,000, $69,000 actually at Bitcoin's all-time high. And after this halving event, obviously there's a bit of a transitionary period as miners and retail investors tend to get used to the new inflationary shock of the Bitcoin network. But following this, if we give ourselves about a year to adjust, it's predicting a fair value of Bitcoin after the halving event in around 2025 of over $500,000, which I'm sure if you're watching this, you'd be more than happy to see. But if we just go to the price chart we have here on TradingView, I've actually loaded up a few metrics that we can actually use to try and get a better indication of how price might react leading up to the halving and following the halving event for Bitcoin. So if I just turn on this indicator here, it actually shows us the halving events on the Bitcoin price chart. And what we'll do is map out how price reacted following the halving event and in the period leading up to it. And I can also load up here one of our private TradingView scripts that you can get through your Look Into Bitcoin subscription, which is the Bitcoin stock to flow oscillator, which as discussed can be a great indication for when Bitcoin is potentially very under or overvalued according to its fundamental fair value of the stock to flow. So if I just add on where the next Bitcoin halving event will occur, which is around here in late March 2024, maybe early April 2024. As I said, this is constantly changing depending on the current rate of new blocks entering the network. We can actually map out how the Bitcoin price reacted potentially from the bear cycle low up to the halving event and compare that to how we're currently reacting in price. So we can see right now that if we work under the assumption that Bitcoin has already bottomed at around $15,000 to $16,000, that the time between that bottoming and the Bitcoin halving event is around 500 days. It's not exact, it's going to change a little bit, but if we just say around 500 days from our current bottom to the halving event, what we can do is actually compare how the Bitcoin price reacted in the 500 days before the halving event in the previous 2 cycles. So if we just map out 500 days before the 2020 halving, it actually indicated very close to the Bitcoin price bottom of that bear cycle, and then again in the 2016 halving, 500 days before that would give us again very close to the lows of that Bitcoin bear cycle. And if we just overlay the actual price action we had from those 500 days up to the halving event over the current Bitcoin price action line up with our price bottom, we can see how it might actually map out and how our price action might react leading up to this event. So if we overlay those here, and I'll just recolor the 2020 halving event in yellow. And if we just zoom in a little bit and see how price actually reacted, we can see following our Bitcoin price bomb, we've actually had a very bullish price reaction and potentially more so than other cycles may have indicated we were to expect. We can see both of them are actually indicating a fairly similar price valuation, a fair valuation at the halving event of around $28,000, which if you are a price action technical analysis trader would actually line up with a few key levels in Bitcoin. So maybe that $28,000 region is a level to watch, especially over the next year as we lead up to the halving event. What we really want to see is following the halving event, how price reacted. So what I've done here is just overlay the price action between the halving event and the following all-time high we had in Bitcoin's price action. And as we can see, this aqua line is representing following the 2012 halving event, this orange line following the 2016, and this purple line following the 2020 halving event. And we can see there are diminishing returns in Bitcoin's price just as it matures and grows as an asset class, and generally the market cap increases and there's just less volatility within the space. We can see the actual returns following the halving events are decreasing somewhat, but realistically, if we were to follow something like this, it definitely wouldn't be bad for Bitcoin's price. If we just assume that we keep that $28,000 figure we figured from the previous one of the price action leading up to the halving event, we can see if we were to follow the 2012 price action, we'd reach values of about 1.25 million, the 2016 prices of around 400,000, and the 2020 halving prices of around $100,000. So if we factor in that there may be some diminishing returns as well, maybe the purple 2020 halving event price action following that is where we most likely may see. So prices of around $100,000 within the next few years. So just to summarize, the Bitcoin halving event, or halving event, whichever you'd prefer, cuts the inflationary rate of new Bitcoin entering the network by 50%. And historically, these large fundamental occurrences have a noticeable impact on the Bitcoin price, both before, in anticipation, and following the event due to the supply shock reaction of just fewer Bitcoin entering the network and just the supply and demand economics that works within the cryptocurrency and especially Bitcoin space. We can also fairly accurately predict that our next halving event, which will be 210,000 blocks following our previous one, will likely occur in around March, maybe April 2024. So just over a year's time from now, the Bitcoin block reward will reduce from 6.25 Bitcoin per block to 3.125 Bitcoin per block. And as we saw in our previous historic examples of price action leading up to and following this halving event, it is likely that we are going to see some positive price reaction up to and after this fundamental Bitcoin change. If you like this video, then please visit lookintobitcoin.com, where you can also consider becoming a site subscriber to gain access to live chats, in-depth newsletters, indicator alerts, private trading view scripts, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. I hope you like this video. Please let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on where Bitcoin may go after the next halving event and where you could see Bitcoin's price at the actual event occurring. Let me know in the comments down below and on social media. I look forward to reading and replying to all of them. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.